So, thank you again. Welcome to this 34th Midi de la microfinance et de l'inclusion financière, organized by ADA, but of course always with the support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Directorate for Development, Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs, and in fine, the Inclusive Finance Network of Luxembourg. And special thanks, as usual, as well to Banque de Luxembourg for letting us use this very nice auditorium. Just a couple of words of introduction before we get into today's topic. I think all of you who have browsed through United Nations publications or research done by foundations like the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates Foundation, for example, and others, realize that rural worlds and poverty seem to be quite closely linked. The statistics may differ, but I've looked up a few figures. 40% of the world's population lives in rural areas. 3/4 of the world's population of the poor live in rural areas, so I think that's quite significant. We all have been faced with, on a regular basis, by press reports about famine, catastrophes in Africa in particular. And I think there is also a clear awareness that the world population grows, is concentrated more and more in urban areas, so all these people need to be fed. As ADA, we have thought and worked on this topic for some time. We're involved with the rural area in poor countries, mainly in terms of partnerships. We have partnerships with the FAO, for example, on training programs. We have partnerships developed with Central American and African microfinance networks for capacity building and raising the awareness of the specific problems of the rural world. But we've also been helping on product development. I'm just mentioning the micro-leasing for farmers in Burkina Faso as one example, for example. And then lastly, also on the financing side, through LMDF, the Luxembourg Microfinance and Development Fund, which has a fairly significant portion of its portfolio invested in MFIs in rural areas in the poor countries. So I think, like any economic activity, agriculture as well, in order to develop, to grow, needs investment. And I think that leads me then to today's topic, which is investment funds and microfinance, how to boost sustainable agriculture in developing countries. And for that, I'm pleased to have two panelists here with me, coming from Rome and from Geneva. Massimo Pera is working for the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, where he manages a program facilitating sustainable and inclusive investments in agribusiness sector. He is an agribusiness economist by training, as far as I know. You will be able to read more about our two speakers on the website that has background information. I think that is available to everyone who wants. Our second speaker is Matthew Sparks. He is General Corporate Counsel of Root Capital.
I'll take the promotion. Thank you.
Right. of Root Capital, which is a leading social investment fund targeting, in particular, the rural and agricultural sector. Established in 1999, I believe, extended more than $700 million in terms of loans and other financial support or products. And again, specifically farmer associations or private businesses helping to build sustainable livelihoods, in particular in Africa and Latin America. So that's for the introduction. Leading on from this, I guess we get to our first point that I would like to talk with you about is, and I address it to Massimo maybe in the first place. So in your view, why is financing agriculture and rural activities such a hot topic? I mean, I mentioned a couple, but maybe I'm sure you have a little bit more to say to that.
Yeah, sure. So good morning, everybody. I think there are several reasons for financing agriculture becoming a hot topic today. And so I think one of the most relevant drivers is that despite the prevailing view that agriculture is a very risky sector, which it is actually, still you notice that investments into agriculture are experiencing a noted growth due to the increase in the price of agricultural commodities, food commodities, and also related to this, also to the to increase the projections of profitability for investment funds. So this is one part of the story. The other part of the story is that there are new improved models and technologies that can now be applied to financing agriculture that helps mitigating those risks, that helps distributing those risks, for example, throughout the value chains. And you can see in the sector that there are but there are some new promising pioneering institutions, banks, MFIs, investment funds, which are now piloting new approaches to develop some very tailored and ad hoc products for agriculture, especially for not only for producers, for all the actors of the chains. And by doing this and by leveraging on the information that you can take from these different actors throughout the chains, you can have some really profitable models that are showing to be impactful and effective in several developing countries. So this is the other reason. And third, but not least, is that the international community, including international organizations, governments as well, so the public sector as a whole, is revamping its attention on agriculture. Because as Gilles was saying, I mean, 3/4 of the poor people live in rural areas, and they tend to migrate to urban areas, and this is a problem. And then also because, you cannot think of development without thinking about agriculture. So I think these three drivers more or less go together, right? So new profitability projections, new models for applying financing to agriculture, and a renewed interest from the public sectors, and so public-private partnerships.
Okay. Well, I think leading on from that, I mean, we're talking about poor countries, poor people, developing countries, poor people rather. And I think a lot of us are used to the mainstream microfinance activity in those countries. And to some extent, I mentioned LMDF before, I mean, addressing or trying to target rural areas. But is agricultural finance something more than just microfinance?
I would say the short answer is yes, and we're a good example of that. Root Capital is an organization that is specifically dedicated to rural agricultural finance, and we have targeted the SME sector as our primary client base and the primary recipient of our technical assistance because we have seen a demonstrable impact from doing so, and because I think at some point along the chain we realized that it is easier to understand the very, very complex risk profile of rural agricultural investment. And I think that it's an area where if you look back, I mean, it's a relatively nascent industry, and if you look back 10 years, you would probably see a number of market sectors that were once regarded as outside the mainstream of conventional microfinance and regarded as being too risky for even impact-oriented investors. And I think that agriculture is seen as a specialized and unique space right now because of the risk factors that simply cannot be controlled for, such as environmental vulnerability, political instability, currency fluctuations, all of these X factors that have to be considered when making a deal to invest in an agricultural enterprise. But I think that, as Massimo was saying, it dovetails nicely with this question, the recent advancements in the type of product that's being developed to address what is a massive need for capital in the agricultural sector. I mean, you have hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers, an increasing number of aggregators, grower associations that are doing real good, both from in terms of providing access to market and providing opportunity for the growers that they serve. You have new products that I think are helping to mitigate some of those risks. And one of the areas that we're working particularly hard in is to build the value chain, to bring in more support from corporate stakeholders, from the buyers, from other points along the commercial and primarily export and domestic-oriented value chains, and convincing them that you need to help underwrite certain aspects of your own value chain. You need to provide technical assistance. You need to engage in this sort of cross-subsidization that we like to refer to, which will ultimately make the business to which you're lending or in which you're investing more viable in the long term. And so I think that it is very specialized. It is very risky in many respects right now, but I'm encouraged that as more people get into it and as more interest is generated for agricultural investment, you'll see it become more in the mainstream. But it is very important to enter the prospect with eyes open and to understand that there are fundamental differences in terms of the risk profile of an ag deal than, say, perhaps a solar deal.
Yeah. If I can quickly add to that, I think if you look at the industry, the mainstream discussions today, I mean, most of the practitioners, I would say, would still think that agriculture is just a subsector of microfinance. While I don't agree, I agree with you. It needs a specialized financing sets of products and approaches. And I think the reason lies on the difference between generic financial services just for managing daily needs of the smallholder farmers, for smoothing consumption's needs and these kind of things, while actually because the point is that microfinance is all about inclusive finance now. So for smallholders, it's just generic financial services for this kind of needs. What we think as FAO, and this aligns with what Matt was saying, is that you have to develop specialized financing also for agriculture. Because specialized financing, I mean, it's one of the most relevant drivers for development in the long term. And this is proven by the literature and by the experiences all over the world. So if you want to make agriculture as one of the areas where you want to see development, then you need to develop some specialized financial products, trying to overcome in a way this misleading understanding that smallholder farmers can only manage these kind of daily things. You need to provide them with financial services and technical assistance so that many of them can actually improve their business, and their business can become a reliable, they can become reliable partners for the other actors in the chains and for the banks as well.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And just one little build on that, there's a thread of sort of helping to solidify the resilience of value chains, right? Because the decision of a buyer or an exporter to enter or leave or stay in a market is going to be predicated often, and Massimo can speak better to this than I can, but it's going to be predicated, at least in part, on the ability of the suppliers to continue providing a product, right, to continue accessing capital, and which is why it's just that much more important for MFIs and for investors to focus on creating products and attracting investors that are willing to be more patient, that are willing to view total return as impact and sustainability and a modest coupon is part of the value proposition.
Because if I may interrupt, reading up a little bit on that stuff before the event today, it seemed to me that at least some of the literature takes either the sort of smallholder farmers approach, and the other one is more value chain oriented. Is there a contradiction, or is it one flow, or do you have different investors looking at either the smallholders or the value chain? You sort of partially answered that already, but what do you say?
But I would say that the value chain approach shouldn't be seen as something separate or different from the smallholder financing approach. Okay. To me, and this is the approach that we have at FAO, it should be the entry point for financing agriculture in any case. Because if you look at the trends in agriculture, in the past 20 years, the capital investments has increased, and the production in terms of volumes has increased, and the value of the commodities has increased. So where has this financing come from so far? If you look at the statistics, very small partial contribution came from financial institutions. So where did the rest come from? It came from all these actors, buyers, wholesalers, traders, input providers, services. So the point is that you cannot forget what happens throughout the chains and just try to focus on one segment of it. If you leverage on this kind of non-institutional or informal information that are available, then as a bank or as a financial institution, you have such an improved technologies that can better lead to more tailored financial services that can actually be used for like kind of even tripartite kind of agreements with buyers and input providers or farmers. And this again helps making the final financial product more less risky, and because the risk is again distributed all over the chain. And again, you can also avoid the typical kind of unmovable guarantees or the land title as a guarantee for farmers, because most of them cannot afford it. And you can develop alternative forms of collateral. So there's a lot of things going on in this respect.
And you just spoke directly to, I would say, 60% of our portfolio, which is focused on value chain, often export-oriented finance. And granted, we're pushing more into what we refer to as the frontier of domestic value chains in foreign currencies, which carries its own complexities and risks. But the majority of our deals do consist of root capital providing working capital to grower associations or established businesses that source product from a very, very large pool of smallholder producers. And so you have that. You're providing access to finance for that level of the value chain, which then translates into greater purchasing power, more communities, more farmers benefited, and a ostensibly bankable client that may be able to access finance from other places because it's a more developed business. And then we negotiate oftentimes with the buyers of the product with whom we'll have an equally strong relationship, sort of underscoring that point that you have to form connections at all levels of the value chain. Root capital is very close with a lot of the companies that buy our clients' product. So we'll have those tripartite agreements whereby the proceeds of the sale will come to us first, we'll debit the amount due, and we'll give the rest back to the organization that had borrowed from us. And it works very well, and it allows us to, exactly as you said, streamline the transactional process by avoiding security agreements, by avoiding putting those proverbial handcuffs on a client by mortgaging their wet mill. Because we don't want to own a wet mill, we want to provide working capital.
Okay. Someone was saying the other day, there's plenty of money available for the poorer countries, but not enough goes into agriculture investment. In particular in Africa, I think someone said it's only 5% of all the money that goes into Africa goes for the benefit of agriculture. I don't know whether it's true, but there's an order of magnitude at least. So now in microfinance, we've seen that MIVs, investment funds, have become a very mainstream but also large component of financing generated for MFIs and microfinance activities in general. For agricultural finance specifically, is there, you proved that there is a space for investment funds, specialized investment funds, and is it, can one hope for a decent return as an investor, or is it more of a non-profit because of all the risks that you sort of mentioned?
Yeah, again, the short answer I think is yes, and we're proof of that, right? We are not structured as a fund per se, but we do underwrite our entire lending portfolio with investment capital, and so
it's not just donor money.
Not donor money. In fact, we don't make any loans with donor money. Our donor money underwrites our technical assistance and catalytic functions, helps keep the lights on, but our lending portfolio, which at any given time is around $100 million, is underwritten purely with investment capital. And so someone will buy a note from Root, and they'll take a return of anywhere between 0% at their choosing, and upwards, into the 3.5% range, depending on the individual term. So we do provide an investment vehicle. And we do pay everyone back, and we do pay a return. And granted, our investor, whether you're talking about the individual accredited investor, ultra-high net worth individuals, foundations, multilateral development banks, et cetera, are looking at what we sort of refer to as a total return. So there is some financial upside to buying a root capital note, but granted, what the U.S. Treasury rates have been the last few years, we're actually providing a pretty nice return versus the government security. So we have that going for us, which is nice. But you're balancing that desire for a commercial grade return with the desire for impact. And agriculture has proven to be an area where impact is quite substantial. And so I think that for the more commercially oriented investor, you're probably not going to play in the microfinance space or the agricultural space unless you're at least somewhat concerned about impact and sustainability. And so to that I would say there's absolutely a market for a specialized agricultural product, but I think it goes back to that need to look at the whole picture, because money itself isn't going to solve the long-term resilience of a value chain. Yeah.
It's not just a question of money, you also need more than just finance, right? I mean, we mentioned technical assistance, which is a wide area where I guess people like you are definitely indispensable.
Yeah. Well, yes, of course, it's not just financial. It's not just finance. I think you need at least two other side components to have a sound and sustainable and profitable and inclusive financial system for agriculture. And one is technical assistance. There are a lot of constraints and bottlenecks that most of the time halt investments, or either from investment funds or from banks. And this relates to the weak skills that sometimes you can find in developing countries among farmers, producers, growers, cooperatives, in terms of quality accomplishment or capacity to produce or capacity to improve productivity or accessing financial services, all this kind of stuff. So you need technical assistance, and this is where FAO does most of its work. Like the partnership with ADA specifically on training and capacity development is one of our main activity to MFIs, so both to the demand side and to the supply side, farmers and MFIs. So that's one thing. Technical assistance is definitely needed, and this is why many of these new investment funds are embedding in their structure a specific technical assistance unit, isn't it? And the other one I would say is the government support. You cannot go into such a risky, challenging sector without partnering with the public sector. Because you need an enabling environment, you may need investments in infrastructures, you may need some kind of cross subsidies to boost the sector, and you have many examples. I mean, subsidies alone tend to fail. We've seen so many experiences in the past decades. But you cannot just go without it. This is my point. And you can see many experiences in like insurance in Mexico or the case of Crédit Agricole du Maroc, where you have this huge support of the state in developing this Green Morocco plan, which supports the provision of financial services to all the levels of the value chain. So I think technical assistance, provision of financial services, and the public support are needed.
Yeah, and I can just quickly sort of throw out an example of how that has worked in our experience. So Root Capital is oriented, the majority of our clients, our portfolio is oriented towards coffee. So fair trade, organic, export grade coffee, generally speaking. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of La Roya, which is the coffee leaf rust epidemic that has been crushing Central and South America for the last several years. So in response to that, becoming a really serious factor in the livelihoods of our clients, not to mention our own portfolio risk profile, we partnered with the U.S. Agency for International Development and with a number of private sector corporate partners and NGO partners to come up with this thing called the Coffee Farmer Resilience Initiative, which is sort of a multi-pronged approach to combating Roya among farmers in Central and South America. And the way that it works, I guess primarily Central America, but the way that it works is we raised money that would be specifically allocated, investment capital that would be specifically allocated for long-term restoration loans. And then we raised money from the private sector that would underwrite sort of, I guess you could say, private sector subsidized technical assistance. And so we've engaged the Progresso Foundation out of the Netherlands to go and do on-the-ground analyses and impact assessments and agronomic training with the farmers who are presumably benefiting from the restoration loans. And then we had the USAID matching funding through the form of a cooperative agreement, which then subsidizes the private sector component. So you have all three of these things working together to provide technical assistance, to provide long-term training, and to provide financing that has resulted in Root becoming, I think, one of the largest coffee restoration lenders in Latin America, which is sad given the size of the need and given the actual proportion of our portfolio. But we're proud of that, and I think we're looking at it as a model for how to expand the concept of cross-subsidization and partnership across other industry areas too.
Interesting.
If that makes any sense.
I'm sure it does. Otherwise, we'll get questions anyway.
I fully anticipate
which
that.
means, anyway, I think we're... well, we could go on for longer, but I think it's the time to give maybe the opportunity to the audience to ask a few questions as well. So please feel free. There's a microphone that's going to be at your disposal. Who dares to take the first step? No.
See a hand in the back.
Okay. Casper?
Yeah, thank you, Gilles. I was wondering, Casper Ransley, Luxembourg Microfinance Development Fund. I was wondering around this demand and supply of capital to the sector with regards to the real needs they are. Because, as you mentioned, sort of maybe the easiest point of entry for capital is to look at export markets, to look at the areas of agriculture which generate a relatively, or have a very solid or comparatively solid value proposition, where there's the long-term big needs of development in general of that sector, often the more localized and national markets, and in terms of staple crops, etc. And so it's two interesting perspectives here on that, and I would love to hear your view. Thanks.
Should we reply?
Okay.
If you, let's take it in turn. So whatever.
Just very quickly, I think that goes. You make a very important point, and we get a lot of pressure and encouragement from our investors to look at those domestic value chains, to look at the more challenging markets, because as you noted, that is where a lot of the need rests. And if you look at Root's model, we're finance, we're lending, we advise, technical assistance, training, and then catalyze, which we regard as this catalytic function of going out and trying to build an industry to pick up this enormous addressable need, because we can't touch it ourselves. And so it's much easier to enter the market by looking at the established businesses and finding clients that are more profitable and more established and more stable. But in effect, the real need is to go beyond those, and there's a massive demand for financing and investment among companies that are less established, less stable. And so that's where that need for the cross-subsidy and the technical assistance and the partnerships with organizations like FAO and the multilaterals and the private sector really come into play. You have to be able to convince corporate buyers and government, sovereign funders and multilateral funders that these investments are going to ultimately be for the betterment of the value chain, and that it will pay off in the longer term, but it is a longer term, more complex proposition.
Yeah, I think it's not just a matter of looking at the most profitable end markets. It's also, the reason why a lot of MFIs and banks and credit unions are still hesitant to go into agriculture is, again, because it's very risky. But I think there's a kind of a mismatch in terms of information as well. And this is why I want to reiterate this point, that you need to leverage a lot on the informal information that you have, also on the financial flows and dynamics within a chain. So you may find that there are producers who have certain specific needs, which in a way are related to timing, to the need that they have to pay their providers, but at the same time they have a quick turnover. So there are a lot of elements that you want to look at, and that the actors of the value chains already have in terms of information. So, yes, look at the markets, but look also at the real needs of your potential clients. And because, the issue is that, as I was saying, most of the financial products and services within value chains in these last decades have been provided mostly by these informal actors. But this supply, this offer is quite limited in a way. Because, of course, in terms of outreach, in terms of diversification of products, in terms of pricing, it's a bit limited. So if financial institutions manage to address this information, have kind of a market intelligence, they can develop a value proposition for their products that really fits the needs of their clients. Of course, you cannot just finance anyone on the value chains. You want to focus maybe on a specific segment. But still, it's a matter of understanding the real needs. It's become trendy again, the issue of putting the clients at the center. Something that should have been there for years. It was there maybe a long time ago, but it's becoming central again, which is fine. So this is why I'm saying there's a revamped interest in developing something that is very tailored to the needs of your final clients, especially producers and smallholders, because that can still be profitable. Yeah. I don't know if it answered more or less the question.
And the only point I would make on that is you identified an opportunity, but also a challenge, because as you try to scale an organization, a fund or a lender, one of the hurdles, I guess, is figuring out a way to do deals on an efficient basis. And if you're tailoring product to every client, or you're trying to meet the specific needs of a client, it becomes more difficult to come up with a standardized approach. And that's a challenge that we face on a near daily basis, where we work with an organization to understand their needs and then work very hard to try to tailor our standard loan product or short or long-term product to what they're trying to do. And it makes it a challenge to continue growing at the pace that we want to, and to do that.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Anyone else? Down here, Max. It's a long way for Pauline.
At the present time, we only do debt. And so we are exclusively a lender. We haven't engaged in any equity investments. And it's been by choice. It's not I don't think it's for lack of opportunity. I mean, you see counterparts of ours in this space, whether it's Responsibility in Zurich or our Acumen Fund in New York, who are doing a lot in equity. And it's just been our organizational focus to have a debt portfolio. That's where we've established sort of our niche in the marketplace. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity. I think that you have a different set of challenges. Equity investors, I think, would tend to look for a slightly higher return than a short-term debt investor might at root. It's a longer time horizon for any type of ROI. And so given the fact that, an agricultural enterprise may appear to be very stable one year, but then could be completely upended by a bad season the next year, I think that it's an increasingly challenging market to work in, but there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of need. And I'm convinced that there are a lot of good target companies out there that would make very nice investments if people are willing to invest the time and effort to diligence them and understand the nuances of their risk as an ag business.
So you're saying that investment equity is even more specialized than lending?
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm not a specialist in that field, but I would say that the short answer is yes, because we tend to get in, get out, with regard to each individual loan. We don't do that much in the way of long-term lending, and we have a pretty close finger on the developments within our client, because if you're doing a 6 to 9 month line of credit to underwrite a specific season, you have a very targeted agenda for that product. And you get your money back, you have your cleanup period, then you do it again for the next season, and that's more predictable. And we know that if something's going bad, we can change course, whereas once you have equity placed and it's not necessarily liquid, it is even more specialized and challenging. Yeah.
I think there was a gentleman there.
Eduardo Zlumsnes from the European Investment Bank. I have a question to both speakers. First, to the root capital. Do you take some form of climate insurance, like climate index type of insurance, to protect your investments? And is this insurance readily available for your markets? And a question to Fao also in this area. What are the main maybe topics related to climate change and investment protection that your agency is undertaking now? Thank you.
Great. So thank you for the question. To answer it, no, we don't. We are exposed to Mother Nature and her whim. So We haven't, as a general rule, I think our portfolio is too large unless you could have sort of a regional form of coverage that would indemnify us against risks across multiple countries. And I think that what we found in the instances where we have looked at this, and my program colleagues would be able to speak to it better, is that it's a very, very expensive product, and that we're not big enough, don't have the resources to have that type of coverage. As much as it may be a nice thing for our investors and for our risk, we just haven't gotten into that yet.
With regards to what FAO does in this respect, so first of all, in some countries we provide technical assistance to financial institutions who wants to develop a specific portfolio for crops, for example, that are more resilient. So you have this new climate-smart agriculture approach. And so we help them analyzing the markets and seeing what kind of new products can be developed specifically for specific crops that needs maybe a longer, kind of investments because the cycle is different and it's more expensive. You need a larger investments for it in terms of fertilizers and inputs. And at the same time, we provide support to some countries in collecting data for the establishment of new all the climatic data and all the, let's say, the risk environment data that you need. So there are some countries who really starts from scratch. So they haven't collected maybe geographical and climatic data for years. So you need first to understand what is the different layers of risk, who is exposed. And we don't do that by ourselves alone as FAO. We do it in partnership with private companies or other partner organizations. And we do a lot of training of this. So I think our main strength is we are gathering a lot of experience and successful experience from several countries. And we try to help other countries to manage this information and eventually replicate the good experiences. So we do both technical assistance and provision of training and dissemination of the information on what's been done, which has been successful so far. There's a long way ahead. It's something new. It's something that needs to be really still piloted in many countries. You have good success cases. You have others that are maybe a bit less good. But, of course, it's something we are also looking at.
And just very quickly, I'd be in trouble back home not to note the fact that while we haven't gotten into the realm of climate index insurance, what we have done to mitigate some of that risk is developed a portfolio of guarantee facilities, in a lot of cases underwritten by the Development Credit Authority of USAID, which are guarantees, generally speaking, up to a certain amount allocated towards a specific portfolio with a 50% coverage ratio. And so, for example, I mentioned the Coffee Farmer Resilience Initiative. We have the long-term restoration loans. We have a specific USAID DCA guarantee facility that covers us against the inevitable risks of that particular market sector. And it was because USAID and others understand that to encourage investment and to encourage that type of activity, they need to help mitigate some of that risk, being climate risk among the principles.
I think there are two questions down here. You still? Okay, fair enough, but there's still the gentleman in the blue shirt.
We're from the Dutch Embassy. I have actually a question regarding the definitions of the words you're using. I'm actually interested in how you would define impact concerning these investments and also sustainability, because companies like Monsanto, Bayern, and Syngenta also call themselves sustainable. And personally, I have some doubts with that. So I'm actually interested in that.
Yeah, so we have an entire team of people far smarter than myself at Root Capital that are charged with impact analysis. And so we're doing everything from household level surveys within smallholder communities to a lot of information sharing with our peer lenders. We have an organization that we're developing called the Council on Smallholder Agricultural Finance, or CSAF, which is Root Capital and then 7 or 8 other I think exclusively European impact finance organizations to aggregate data, to look and to identify best practices and see where these loans are making a difference. We can quantify it by saying, how many smallholders have been served by this loan? How many? What was the impact on household income? What was the impact on the ability of children of smallholder farmers to go to school? We have a lot of data on that, and we've been able to demonstrate pretty thoroughly how the one might say flow down effect of financing for an agricultural cooperative benefits a pretty large swath of poor people in very rural areas. Sustainability, it carries a lot of buzzword connotations. It can be used and abused in a lot of ways, but it is sort of an inherent element of our approach, right? We don't loan to a client unless they meet certain environmental criteria. We have what we refer to as an environmental scorecard, which is part of our diligence process, where the team underwriting the deal will ask specific questions and do specific analyses of a client and their business practices to see whether their suppliers are using sustainable harvesting practices, whether they're using certain chemicals or using certain growing techniques that are considered to be damaging to the environment. And so we do try to quantify that both in our impact assessments as much as possible to say how many people are benefiting from this product, how many lives, how many homes are we touching with this loan. And then from the sustainability aspect, we do try as best we can to say you have to be conducting your business in a certain way that the bright minds have deemed to be sustainable and environmentally conscientious before we'll finance you.
And if they are not, then you're using your TA facilities to bring them up to level?
Yeah, well, I don't know to what extent we would actually do a deal if an organization is using practices that we can't get behind. If it's a small swath of a producer group, if you're a co-op serving 1,000 smallholder farmers and a couple of them are not using best practices for environmental standards, then yeah, we would use our advisory services platform to work with the growers in that organization to help improve their practices. So yeah, that is part of it. And then other organizations that may not be viable clients yet will be the beneficiaries of our advisory services, with the hope that someday soon, through that technical assistance and through that interaction with our consultants and with other organizations like FAO, they'll become a client that is underwritable from both a financial and environmental point of view. I hope that answers the question.
I'm sure there's
something
to say on that.
No, sure. Sustainability, at least when we support or promote or provide technical assistance to investments or to financial institutions, when we want to look at these investments or financing that are both inclusive and sustainable. So inclusive, of course, means trying to have as many clients involved that are usually unbankable, so excluded from the mainstream financial sector. So that's one part. And then the sustainability is not only the environmental one. You have the environmental sustainability, the economic sustainability, meaning that you're supporting institutions that you want to see running by themselves in times without the need for further technical assistance. And you also have the social sustainability, so looking at the employees' rights or the workers' rights or respect of ethnic aspects. So we want to promote that kind of investment. I think we're pretty straight and clear in this respect. You may know that there's a task force that FAO is part of that has developed the principle for responsible agricultural investments, which has been undersigned by several governments and countries. There are issues that we cannot deny that exist in terms of, the rise in investments in agriculture also leads sometimes to the land grabbing phenomenon, for example. So you have to look at all these aspects. But what I would argue here is that the profitability of an investment does not necessarily go against the sustainability. This is what we're trying to say here. One of the most renowned books about microfinance of some 10, 15 years ago was the triangle of microfinance, right, where you have to balance outreach, sustainability, and profits in a way. But these things can be balanced in a way. So, yeah, FAO promotes that, definitely. This is the way we look at impact. Sometimes we have quite a stronger advocacy role to play vis-à-vis the government, sometimes not. It's not easy, but it's something we look at, definitely.
Because within the FAO there's also a discussion going on between people who are having more agroecological stance versus that is rather focused about the minimization of external inputs, and the other stance, and what is then actually the strategy from the institution?
The corporate strategy, well, FAO is a large institution, so it's hard to have, no. Again, it's the same answer. I mean, you try to use the most agreed global agricultural practices that are as much as possible environment friendly, that are in line with this new climate smart kind of approach. It's not easy. Because sometimes it's easy to develop the principle and to develop the standards, but then having the farmer groups or the cooperatives applying it's another story. So it takes time also to sensitize producers and growers. But this is the approach. This is, if you look at the principle and objectives, I would say from a corporate point of view, this is definitely the approach.
There's still a question outstanding. Gentleman over there.
Arnaud Gillin in Pax Luxembourg. We are here in a session promoted by ADA. It's about microfinance, and we hear two persons that are talking about agricultural finance. And the status was to say, for the moment, MFIs are not doing sufficiently into agricultural finance. And you said it's a lack of market intelligence, not having the right products, etc. Don't you think there is a role that needs to be played by the financiers of these microfinance institutions to actually incentivize them to go more into agriculture? Most of the MIVs in the world, so the microfinance investment vehicles for the moment, are lending without any eligibility criteria in terms of the use of the proceeds of the loans. They're lending and they say, okay, we support your microfinance activity at large. But how would you see practically an incentive to be built in within existing or new MIVs to be created to actually push more the MFIs to go into the more difficult areas of agriculture financing? And have you done this already, like supporting investors or funders to actually to work together with the MFI on designing some products from your side, FAO, and from your side, Root Capital, based on your experience?
Mm-hmm. So yes, it's a good point. And just to clarify, most of you know, FAO doesn't lend money, right? We're not a financial institution, so we provide technical assistance. But I can mention as an example, some of the work that we do with the Rabobank Foundation, for example, in some countries in Africa, where you basically, the foundation can provide a credit guarantee for a bank, which doesn't cover 100% a specific portfolio, but it does cover part of it, under the condition that it goes to agriculture, to some specific sector, or to some specific value chains. And that has to be gradually reduced over the years, because it helps in a way, together with the technical assistance that we provide, to show how the investment can be, again, profitable and effective. And you can also, if you have some passion capital to use, then you can also finance some long-term investments in agriculture for several segments of the value chain. So this is, I think, an example of how, instead of just lending money and say, okay, let me see as an indicator how many loans you gave out to poor people. No, it's different. It's let me see how you approach this potential market of this specific crop, say cassava or rice or coffee, and try to segment the market, identify the most potential one, provide financial services and financial products specialized for this specific niche, and we'll provide guarantee to that in case of default of repayment. So this is a way. There are many other ways, but I think technical assistance together with some kind of risk mitigation instruments could be effective in a way to avoid what you were saying.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I don't have much to add. I mean, the only thing that I would note is that is that if you are forming a fund or if you are running an MIV, I think that this is an area, based on what Massimo just said, you're obviously dealing in a fair amount of complexity, right, to understand this market. And I think that somewhere inside the asset manager or the bank, there has to be a very careful discussion on what type of investor are we looking for, and how do we approach our clients, how do we approach new investors with this value proposition, where we say you have to be patient, you have to accept that we're going to go out and need to leverage private sector and government funds. We're going to have to find risk mitigants. But once we do, we've got an attractive product. And so it's, there's a marketing and investor relations element of this too that has to be taken into account, because you are getting increasingly into a pretty specialized investor with a fairly robust focus on impact and social benefit.
And just if I can add, of course, we never go to someone forcing them to, have only the agricultural portfolio. I mean, most of the, sometimes if you're a large bank with a significant portfolio in urban areas, you can use the savings that you have from that market to refinance. I mean, it's a matter of developing the strategies based on your vision, your mission, your resources as well. So.
And so just a question to you, Massimo. So for the people in the room, is this a scenario where if they're in the process of looking at an agricultural fund, can you go to the FAO and say, here we are, here's what we're doing, we want assistance, or are there other avenues that people should pursue to get that?
There are many. FAO is one. We're frequently addressed by some investment funds. We're trying to establish a facility which is always there, which could be accessed from time to time by specific investment funds that respond to some eligibility criteria, so that we can provide that kind of technical assistance. It's something we are developing. I mean, it's something that we're gradually getting in. FAO in the past was mostly focused on rather a smallholder finance per se, smallholder. Now we're also opening up a little bit more to the role of how investors can be supported in their activities. So yeah.
So we should call you.
Yeah, we.
Maybe you got his card. So. If there are, all right, one last question, then the gentleman in the middle up there, the second last row, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. I'm Julian from These Consulting. Andrew just mentioned some analysis referring to the positive impact on root capital investment, and I'm just curious to know if there is some studies referring to the potential negative impact on such investment, and if yes, what would be the potential negative impact on your investments in developing countries?
That's an excellent question. I don't know, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that there is a body of research that looks at this as potentially creating contingent liabilities of creating dependency on investment capital and unsustainable performance metrics for investees. Right? Are you really the question? Are you really helping them by giving them money? And that's not. I mean, I would say that our argument to the contrary would be quite strong. Is that everything we've seen suggests that you are creating considerably more opportunity for rural, underserved areas by providing capital to underwrite these businesses in the agricultural sector. That's our reason for existence. But I don't think there's a strong body of work out there. But I think that questions have been raised about. What position are you putting these businesses in by leveraging them, essentially? And were they better off before? I think our answer is roundly no in most cases. But it's an interesting question. It makes me want to go back and look, because I think that we've probably refined our counter-arguments pretty well at this point, but I don't think we hear that particular point raised very often.
Thank you. Thank you both. So I'd ask Mr. Bischler for some concluding remarks and sharing his views with us. He is Ambassador at Large and, dare I say, a dedicated ambassador for microfinance in general, representing the government.
Thank you very much, Gilles. Thank you for Ada for giving me the opportunity to take an active part in this, and thank you for the speakers for the very interesting and very rich remarks that they made. I will not try to do the verbatim because that will take us too much into detail, but let me try to wrap it up in as a summary. In introducing the subject, Jill was, of course, taking a very compelling argument of why at all we should look into this. I mean, 40% of the world population living in rural areas, but then even more importantly, 75% of the poor of the world living in rural areas should be, as Jill pointed out, reason enough to have a closer look at agriculture, agriculture finance, and how to best provide the financial means to be effective in this area. Now, the questions that were asked from the two speakers were, of course, very pertinent. Why has the financing of agriculture and rural activities become such a hot topic? Massimo was pointing out to 3 drivers, and these are encouraging drivers, I would say. There are new financial channels, tailor-made instruments for agriculture more and more, some of which are profitable, which is encouraging. And then there's an increased interest by the international community to have a closer look because of the demographics that I just pointed to in order to address those. Then the question of whether agri-finance would just be another subset of microfinance or not. Is it more than just microfinance? I think, again, here from the two speakers, there came a clear yes, it is more. Agriculture finance has a very complex risk profile, as Massimo pointed to. And he is still there again, gave one element of hope, telling us that there is advance in product development in order to be able to face the huge financial needs that it takes to promote agriculture in the developing world. Both the speakers insisted also very heavily of the importance to address the topic in terms of value chain, if I'm not mistaken, rather than just focusing on one element of the value chain, namely the smallholder farmer. It is, as a matter of fact, a little bit counterintuitive to just pick out one element of a value chain, especially an economic value chain, and to focus on him or her, especially if you want to manage risk in a given sector. And here Matthew was talking to the practice of his organization, Root Capital, that on the one side, of course, provides working capital for the smallholder farmer, but then on the other side also is supporting the suppliers of the smallholder farmer and the buyers from the smallholder farmer in order to streamline what you call, I guess, the transactional chain. No? Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Now, is there a viable space for investment vehicles, investment fund vehicles, in order to provide useful and also hopefully generous input into this into the financing chain for agri-finance? It is not so far, as Gilles pointed out, not so far a lack of money that will be the constraint, but rather the lack of money in agriculture. Microfinance has shown a way in how to produce social impact. How can this be done in agriculture? The speakers both think that there is a way to come in with more sophisticated investment instruments, investment vehicles, and that they can be profitable. Again, Root Capital is giving out loans without relying on donor money, so it's on a commercial basis. And they are looking, of course, at a return, but as Matthew said, a total return, combining the commercial aspect of the return and this mandatory impact that the investor is looking for, I would say. So it clearly takes more than money in order to be useful to agri-finance. Financial resources alone will not do the trick, and Massimo wants to see this also complemented, the financial side complemented by technical assistance on the one side, and then also government support in order to address the risk through guarantee schemes or insurance in order to support the right the right ensemble of initiatives that it takes to be effective. And here again, the experience of root capital shows that it's very good to partner up with partners with maybe deeper pockets and more patient money, more patient capital to be on your side to do just that. I think I will not come back to the questions. People must have the answers in mind. I could, if you wanted to. Maybe just one aspect, the question about the specific needs, how the specific needs of clients are addressed in the long term. And here it was pointed out that it's a lot about risk perception. So there's a lack of information for the time being, a lack of data also. And the call was to develop the right and the adapted value propositions for the different players along the value chain. And I would like to conclude maybe simply by saying that not only you should know your client, but here is a case where you should know your client's client. Maybe that can be useful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Bichler. So it's just left for me to thank everyone, so my two panelists, the audience in the room or watching it on the live stream, and of course our usual partners, Infini, the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, and Banque de Luxembourg, of course. Just one matter of housekeeping. I've been told that ADA is still keen on new members, so if any one of you would like to sign up, there is apparently outside the possibility to do so. For those who already are or don't want to, lunch is probably served now as well, so you might as well all move next door, and I will see you again for the next Midi de la microfinance. Thank you very much.